The Athletic Football Show.
Welcome to the Athletic Football Show. I'm Robert Mays. Joining me tonight, one of our Bengals writers here at The Athletic, Paul Dehner Jr. Paul, how you doing, man?
What's up, Robert? How you doing?
I am very glad that you were able to join us on this Halloween night as you're watching this game from your home in Cincinnati. Lot to dig into. Bengals get beat up by the Browns. Not just a loss, but a pretty ugly loss. And I feel like there's a lot to dig into on the Bengals side of this. So I want to start with what you're concerned about and kind of stacking them up after this game. So you watch what just happened against Cleveland. What is the number one thing you're worried about as it relates to the Bengals moving forward after what you saw tonight?
Chidobe Awuzie's injury. I mean, they could not afford it. They had a depth issue at corner. If they lost him, people might not know his name very well nationally. People might not be very familiar with how he's been playing. He's been playing at a Pro Bowl level at corner, and they have issues at the other corner. They're trying out second-round pick Cam Taylor-Britt for his first professional start tonight. I mean, he spent most of this year on IR because of an injury. He barely played. Last week it was Cam Taylor-Britt just trying to get him some snaps so he knows what it's like to play in a professional game, to the lone guy left tonight. And because they just don't have, they have Trey Flowers behind him. Eli Apple has a hamstring injury, who was an issue to the point they were replacing him. They could not afford to lose their number one shutdown corner at a position where they just don't have the depth. And, they already are without DJ Reader. Those two spots, those are probably their two best defensive players this year, as far as when they were on the field. Those two guys at their position were the two best defensive players that really changed the equation. It does not look good, according to Zach Taylor immediately after the game here. That is a brutal blow that they will have a very hard time overcoming. To me, in the long run, that's my biggest concern coming out of tonight. And there's a lot of other ones.
I think that's a really good one. And if we're trying to stack up reasons why this Bengals season wasn't going to go the way that last year did, injuries were part of this. Okay, I'm looking at it right now. I was pulling it up. Bengals finished 12th in adjusted games lost, according to Football Outsiders defense last year. And even that metric is a little bit skewed because they lost 4 games from Trey Waynes, who wasn't even really part of their plans anyway. So you look at the secondary guys from last season that missed games. Cheeto missed 1 game. He missed the week 4 game against Jacksonville. And then other than that, they really didn't miss anybody in the secondary for any extended time whatsoever.
Or really anywhere else. I mean, that was not just a secondary thing. I mean, their entire offense
3
and
games
defense,
of Logan Wilson,
for the most part. Riley Reif was like the only dude they really lost at any point last season for a long stretch. I mean, that they were charmed. There is no doubt about that. There was going to be a reversion to the mean as far as that goes. I think you can take on injuries. Just Chase, Reader, Awuzie are particularly targeted at positions that become very hard for them to overcome. I mean, outside of QB1, I'd have a hard time finding 3 that leave a bigger impact than those 3 are right now.
Maybe Hendrickson, maybe
Hendrickson, who has been good this year, but not as good as he was last year. As far he's battling stuff. He had a stinger. He's playing through a back tonight. I mean, he's been sort of kind of a little bit. He's been questionable almost every game. So it's not the quantity, it's the quality of these that are really attacking them in some particular places, and who knows when any of them. I mean, there's always hope of guys coming back, but to be taking that on, that's a tough spot that they're in right now there. And then the next one has to be, look, the offensive line was supposed to be fixed. We could talk about what had happened through the first 4 or 5 weeks. It made sense, right? Like, okay, they were learning to play together. The first couple of weeks, it was a bad matchup for guys that were learning to play together. They were figuring out how the league was going to approach them. That could be explained away by what happened after that. They stabilized, they got to the quick passing game, and the last couple of weeks you saw the explosion. Well, the concern was the last couple of weeks they played a Falcons and Saints pass rushes that have very little to offer. And what happens
30th
when
and 31st in pressure rate?
Correct. So what happens when you get back into that mix against the teams that really have the passers? Have you truly stabilized, or was this about opponent? Tonight, it looked like it was about opponent because that looked like a line that looked just like it looked like the first couple of weeks and took away the entire intermediate middle because they didn't have time to get to it. And that was what helped them against Atlanta and New Orleans and their breakouts was being able to utilize that. They couldn't even get to it. Forget Chase, and that's always the other part of this, but like they couldn't get to anything and the line was just not good enough. And so have they really fixed it, or is this who they're going to be where once they see these good pass rushes, you can forget about it?
That's exactly how I was thinking about it. Just watching the fourth quarter of that game and looking up some of these numbers, the fact that it was 30th and 31st in pressure rate in the last 2 weeks, and those pass rushes just not even being what the Browns have been. And the Browns defense has been disappointing this year. But you go up against Myles Garrett, you just kind of see what sort of a different animal it is, and you really realize, is this fixed? Is this progressing in the right direction? So now we're in this place where coming into the season, I think the two biggest arguments, if you were listening to Bengals fans, about why the offseason as a whole was filled with the right set of moves was, one, we have fixed the offensive line. The moves we have made have fixed that. The biggest efficiency roster-wise on our team personnel-wise, we have fixed it. And on defense, sure, we haven't really added any major pieces defensively, but the continuity of the players that we have is going to allow us to build on this. Well, the offensive line doesn't look fixed, and now you're removing pieces from the defensive backfield, so any bit of that continuity now no longer matters. So the pillars of the argument for why the Bengals went about this offseason correctly have both been knocked down here as you watch that game. And then what are you left with? What is this team, and what is this team over the next 8 games?
Yeah, I mean, they're a team that has faced barely a single starting quarterback in this run. I mean, they faced Lamar Jackson. If Jacoby Brissett's technically a starting quarterback, I guess at this point this year, but I mean, they've faced a lot of backups. They've not seen the teeth of their schedule. It awaits them. Okay, Buffalo, Kansas City, whatever Tampa will be come December. These teams, Tennessee will be in there too. I mean, not that they're world beaters, but compared to what they've been facing, this was when they were supposed to make hay. This was supposed to be the portion of their schedule, and maybe they win next week and they're 5-4 at the bye, and that's fine. They were 5-4 at the bye last year, and maybe they can find that again. But this is not your 0-3 in division. So now a division that's Baltimore, by the way, their schedule the second half of the season feels like they could cruise.
It's a great walk. Yeah, it's easiest in the league.
There's no doubt. And the Bengals have kind of the opposite side of this thing. And so now you didn't build your lead that you felt like you might need in that situation. You're 0-3 in the division, so your tiebreak is in a bad spot against Baltimore if you still can make it a 2-team race. And so you start talking about wild cards and things like that. And with some of these other issues that you saw come to a head here tonight, you can't be laying massive eggs like this. Forget the stage. It's the point in your season against in division where you're up against it already 0-2 in the division. You've blown games you shouldn't have blown earlier in the year. Pittsburgh most notably in the opener. And now it just compiles, and it feels like the pile's getting a little high. You can overcome a lot of things, and some of it felt fluky, and you felt like you'd fixed your way through it and had answers. Now it feels like the pile of questions is getting a little high on you pretty early.
And you look at the second tier of the AFC, after the Bills and the Chiefs, and you look into those wild card teams, and there's definitely a path for them to still get a wild card in the AFC. They have the tiebreaker over the Jets and the Dolphins. I think the Dolphins with a healthy Tua, probably a better football team than the Bengals are right now. just their ceiling on offense and what they're able to do when they have all of their guys. But then you look at the other teams in this conversation. I mean, the Colts are in second place in their division. The Browns team that they just lost to is 3-5. The Chargers are 4-3, but the Chargers kind of feel like a little bit of a mess right now. Their defense is playing really poorly. They lost J.C. Jackson for the year. Joey Bosa is still not playing. They're just not playing well. So there is a path for them to go 9-8, potentially 10-7, just by virtue of the talent that they have. And some of these games where things do go their way and they kind of stumble into a wild card spot. But that's the kind of team they were last year. And the hope was that because they fixed the offensive line, because it was one more year removed, that there was going to be some linear progression from what this team was. And it just doesn't feel much different than the team they were last year when their run to the Super Bowl was full of a lot of bounces of the ball that went their way. And if the bounces of the ball aren't necessarily going to go their way, we wind up in a very similar position if you're the Bengals.
Yeah, and one where, the last 2 weeks, it did feel like, they had really taken and left a lot of that stuff behind them, and it just goes to show how much of this does come back to that line holding up a little better. Because, Burrow, he's doing uncharacteristic stuff. I mean, outside of the pick he threw on Sunday Night Football to Patrick Queen against Baltimore, that was his first interception since the opener. I mean, and then, he's one that almost never fumbles or gets the ball stripped. You have a turnover there. I mean, they're just inaccuracy. It's disjointed. It threw him off. I think he was surprised by the fact that this is where it's at. And it felt like such a reversion despite what had happened the last couple of weeks. And so much of it comes back to that, because here's the thing. It's fine to say that you can get in. It's fine to say that you can go 9-8 or whatever. They're in the window, Robert. I mean,
yes,
this is a team on the rookie quarterback contract of Joe Burrow. Oh, by the way, and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, an over probably $100 million value on rookie contracts that they have compiled on this roster. This is the window. And that doesn't mean that once they pay whoever that they can't still make it, but you'll never have more value. You'll never have more opportunity than you have on this roster because of the way they've drafted with Chase, Higgins, and Burrow than you have right now. And you're about to have to pay those guys. And so to think that you can sneak in and maybe this should be a team that shouldn't be living that way and thinking that they might have to live that way. They're going to have some real things that they have to go do some soul searching on this week and really figure out who they are. And maybe, find a way to go beat Carolina next week, get into your bye and figure out what your real answers are, and maybe hopefully get some guys back, because at this point, getting to that point to hit the heater like they did last year, it feels like a real stretch in this moment. And maybe that's some knee jerk off of what we just watched. But, it just
not if they're going to stay hurt.
Stuff's piling up, and that it's happening fast.
Are we worried about Jonah Williams?
It's one thing when it's Myles Garrett, right? But when it's like Isaiah Thomas, right, or whatever, and you're talking about like that.
I don't
and the
think
same
it's
thing,
Isaiah Thomas, but it's close enough.
Who was it that came in?
It is Isaiah Thomas. I thought you were saying
so.
Isaiah Thomas because of Isaiah Thomas. No, his name is
no,
Isaiah
because
Thomas.
that was his name.
Yes,
and so when it's Isaiah Thomas and not Myles Garrett, and the same thing happened in the opener against Pittsburgh. You're like, Alex Highsmith. Okay, Watt is one thing. Highsmith is beating you around the edge. This was, Jonah Williams is supposed to be. He was fine. He was a solid left tackle last year. He wasn't spectacular. He wasn't awful. He was kind of consistent, and you felt like he could take another nice solid bump up this next year. And that just hasn't happened. In fact, it's felt like a reversion, and that's certainly a concern. And you don't expect to see games like this from him, and we've seen more of these honestly than we have in the last couple of years from him, and that's surprising. I don't know what exactly is going on there, because he seems healthy, and he's not normally a guy that you see this roller coaster type stuff from, but he kind of has been that this year.
Is it worth at all? Talk about the window. having a conversation about this team being 29th in cash spending heading into the season when they have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase on rookie contracts, and not being a little bit more aggressive in trying to upgrade some of the talent that they had on defense, or going to get a piece they didn't have last year, or trying to get ahead of whatever sort of regression might be coming for them by saying, you know what, we're going to push a little bit in ways that we haven't in the past. I know they were aggressive in free agency over the last couple of years, but just going out and kind of stretching yourself in ways you might not, because you do think this is your window to get something done.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I will say the strategy on that being, paying Burrow and extending that window of feeling like you can still make moves around him for years to come is a part of that. And there's the, it's on a day where Baltimore makes their move, does anybody really expect the Bengals to make one when they really need to make one at corner? Probably now, if there's anything they could do, I don't expect that. And who knows, this may change things. I mean, the flight from Cleveland to Cincinnati may be filled with Duke Tobin having some conversations he wasn't expecting to have today. But, whether you're talking about being aggressive and pushing and saying you're going for it, like the Ravens kind of pushed a little bit today, not something the Bengals like to do. They like to try to spread it out over years and just continue to give themselves more shots at it. That is the idea behind the cash spend this past year. And they felt like they had plenty of pieces, more than enough pieces in place to pick up where they left off. I don't necessarily have a problem with that strategy today, even as this is going on, because they did, as much as we're talking about the defensive depth, I mean, they did use a first and a second round pick to supplement that. I mean, Dax Hill we finally got to see Dax Hill play snaps tonight because he had to go out to corner to do it because he's been buried behind Von Bell, and Jesse Bates. And so, they did invest, just they did it through the draft. And the cash thing is, a more of a strategy of making sure that they can feel like the window stays open for years to come. I mean, we'll judge that.
Probably isn't a team that's going to throw a bunch of cash around every single year in the way that some of these other teams are. And I think that understanding the realities and the landscape of that, I think, is helpful, and why some teams make these types of decisions and why some teams don't. But when you're looking at just the overall landscape of the other teams that are pushing around the league, like what the Dolphins did this offseason, what the Eagles continue to do, the Eagles don't need Robert Quinn. The Eagles have more pass rushers than almost any other team in the league. But if these are the teams you're competing against to go win Super Bowls, and they're constantly trying to get better in some of these ways, and you're not going to do some of that stuff, I do think it's going to put you at somewhat of a disadvantage in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something where you got to understand where you are and be willing to go for it. And, the strategy, I've talked to Duke Tobin about this on many different occasions, and they feel like they never want to devalue a future year. They just feel like if you just continue to have good teams year in and year out, eventually you'll have years like last year, and build around that and keep that open as much as possible. They've never really been one to say, but sometimes when you feel like you got a shot, really, maybe you do take a little bit out of a future year. That's just never been the way that they've viewed the idea of having long-term success. And maybe, you certainly can knock them for that. It's just not the strategy that they choose to employ.
So the Browns, a team that did make a lot of aggressive moves this offseason, they are, I think, 7th or 8th in cash spending. Obviously, a huge part of that is the Deshaun Watson move. But this is a team that is in kind of a strange spot. They're in this holding pattern until Watson comes back. They've lost a lot of close games this year. But this is just one of those games where everything seems to fall into place about the way this team is built. Their ability to just line up and push you around with 7, 8 offensive linemen, not even trying to hide the ways that they're trying to move the ball with Nick Chubb, Jacoby Brissett making just enough throws, 4 or 5 kind of big throws in this game. And my biggest takeaway on a personnel level from the Browns in this game, I'd say it's twofold. One, Myles Garrett is one of the biggest difference makers in the NFL, like period. Even if you're worried about the way the Browns defend the run, which, by the way, that's something else to bring up. The Bengals ran the ball like 7 times in this game against a team that can't stop the run, and they really couldn't run the ball against the Browns. And if you can't run the ball against the Browns, you can't run the ball against anybody at this point. So Myles Garrett is a guy that just can still wreck a game. And the way that this team is built, he needs to. And going to get Amari Cooper for what the Browns got Amari Cooper for, when all of these other teams are trading first round picks or first and second round picks for some of these other guys, was one of the best moves of the offseason. So the Browns are sitting here with some interesting pieces and, some things to build on. I just don't know if they have enough time this year, even when Watson comes back, to make a real run at this thing, or this is about kind of trying to pick up little breadcrumbs about what they can be over the next 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, they've got plenty of talent. It's been a matter of cohesion and just finish, right? I mean, it's like, how many insane ways could they find to lose games? And if they don't, they just finish a couple of these games. You are talking about them as, they're going to hang around till Watson comes in to maybe give them the upgrade they need at quarterback, or, whatever you're talking about, because when this is exactly the type of game when they can play the game this way, when they can get up and just pound Nick Chubb and just take your soul by running it right down your throat. I mean, that is a dangerous thing in today's NFL, in a year where we've seen the run game shift and become such a powerful weapon for teams. And they've gotten away from that too often, probably. I know people in Cleveland would probably scream and yell that. But they have plenty of pieces. It's just been a matter of, for whatever reason, it hasn't worked together. And tonight it was. And when they have plenty of talent, if they can find a way to get the talent to start playing all on the same page, I think a lot of their games can look like it does tonight. The Bengals certainly did a lot to help them, but Cleveland played well, and they're just going to look back at games like that Jets game and be like, "Cripe." I mean, man, you don't have that ridiculousness, and you are in the mix.
Jets, they lose by 1. They lose by 3 to the Falcons in that weird game. They lose by a field goal to the Ravens. They lose by 2 in that Charger game where they go for it on 4th down and don't get it. I mean, this is combined. We're looking at 1, 4, 6, 9 points that they lost those 4 games by. And the Jets game is an entirely different beast, just like how heartbreaking that was. So I don't know. It's encouraging that they could be figuring some stuff out on the back end. Like, I thought Martin Emerson played fairly well today. If they can get something out of him, where Greedy Williams clearly is not in their plans anymore long-term. So you get Emerson, you get Denzel Ward back. The safety play has been a little bit erratic. Their defense has just been all over the place. And tonight it didn't really seem to matter because they had just enough great snaps from the guys on the outside and just enough of their defensive line dominating a Bengals offensive line that can't really block anybody right now.
Yeah, I mean, Myles Garrett had his hand in so many of those. I mean, the turnovers, gets his hand on the first pick, and the strip was really part of him flushing Burrow over, and another sack on a 3rd down. I mean, it's just there is no question he is such a game wrecker, and I think it's part of why the Browns keep beating the Bengals. It's like it just exploits their weaknesses between inability to stop Nick Chubb and Myles Garrett just completely sticking it to them. I mean, it's a recipe for disaster for these guys right now.
It's a great point. The Browns' weakness as a whole, as a team, is run defense. The Bengals have been one of the worst running teams in the NFL over the last 2 years. And the Bengals' biggest weakness is their ability to pass protect. And this is a team with Myles Garrett. So they really are a terrible matchup for them right now. And that continues to rear its head. So here we are. We have a 4-4 Bengals team in a weird, watered down, hard to pin down second tier of the AFC. And they're going to get Carolina next week, probably win by 2 touchdowns, and then everyone's going to be feeling great again.
Yeah, and that's fine. Good thing they landed the NFC South this year. I mean, it's like they're able to take advantage of that, but you just need to see, where are the Bengals that go into Tennessee and win, go take Kansas City out twice, the team that play to the moment, that play and did that repeatedly last year. You're waiting for that right now. They were sloppy in Baltimore. They were sloppy tonight against Cleveland. These games you got to have in big stages, and that was kind of and falling behind. I mean, they've played 5 road games now, and 4 of them they've been down by double digits early. You're not winning that way. You're not coming back. They've come back to make it close every time except tonight. But to think that that's the way that you can play, how is that happening? 1 time, 2 times, you can talk about coincidences and the ball going here or there. 4 out of your 5 road games, you're down by double digits in the first half. There's something going on in your preparation, in your execution, or all of it for them to have to figure that out.
So now the next step of this is probably just seeing what the timeline for Chidobe Awuzie looks like, thinking about when you potentially get DJ Reader and Jamar Chase back and seeing what full strength looks like for this team down the back half of the season. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I think, the idea is that Reader they hope will be back after the bye. So for Pittsburgh, and then, their hope is that, obviously we've talked a lot this week about Jamar Chase and when he could be back, but the hope being that there's a chance he could play in that game against Tennessee the week after that. Obviously, it's why they didn't put him on IR. They think there's a chance of that. We don't know. Who knows how long that will really take, but they clearly missed him tonight. I don't think that was the reason things went so sideways, but it was part of it. And clearly Burrow is uncomfortable without him as sort of that, that safety net there.
All right. Paul Dehner Jr., thank you very much for the time, sir. It is always great to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Have a good one. Happy Halloween.
All right, guys. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, highly encourage you to do that. We will be back on Wednesday with my good buddy Bill Barnwell from ESPN. So please go back and check that out on the podcast feed. And if you have not listened to the Monday Hangover with me and Mike Sando, we dug into a bunch of games that we didn't get to on the Sunday night show with Nate. So please go check that out in the podcast feed. For now, that's all we got. We'll talk to you guys later.